Welcome. My name is Connor Williams. Today we will explore the concept of cultural identity within Indigenous Australians. David Frank, an Indigenous painter, painted this painting based upon the famous Indigenous Australian activist Vincent Lingiari, who was well known for leading the 1966 strike of Aboriginal workers at the Wave Cattle Station in the Northern Territory. This walk-off was prompted by how poorly Indigenous people were treating, as they were being paid nothing, working the same hours as the others getting paid. This process of differentiation towards the Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians created a sense of discrimination towards the Indigenous Australians as they were being treated poorly for their skin colour. When the British came to Australia, they saturated the lands with their Western ways of living. This led the smaller communities to follow the majoritarian Western ways of law and lifestyles, causing their identity to be shaped by foreign people. The British introduced money, civilised laws, and clothes. The British began dehumanising the Indigenous Australian people for following their law and lifestyle. When their beliefs were being tarnished by the non-Indigenous peoples, the Aboriginal people lost their sense of belonging within their communities and was replaced with a sense of segregation from their own identity. When the Indigenous peoples were deprived of their land, they expressed themselves in spiritual way through their communities and art. The ceremonies consisted of spiritual dances giving the Aboriginal peoples the freedom to connect within the land, and the Dreamtime stories for the children to learn survival skills and important lessons. As explained by Dr. Elizabeth Burns Coleman, an esteemed lecturer of communications and media studies at Monash University and a philosopher of arts by training, explains how Aboriginal arts as Insigma has the significant explanatory power. The ontology of Insigma shows the Aboriginal claims about their relationship with their art and identity. The relationship between the art and land and their identity is extremely important. While their ceremonies mostly surrounded by the idea of connecting with the land, they also provide a learning place for the younger Indigenous peoples through Dreamtime stories. The Dreamtime stories lie at the basis of Indigenous cosmology. It's where the Aboriginal children learn about their history of their ancestors and the creation of country. The Indigenous people would create the narrative-like stories to teach certain lessons and rules they had to abide by to be safe. The use of land and animal symbols and metaphors were a key technique to engage the children and enhance their understanding. Professor Paul Teakin, a well-respected anthropologist, has described the paintings and Dreamtime stories to draw out important events, laws, and lessons that have been passed on subsequently through generations in symbolic form. This aligns with how the Indigenous students best learn in a narrative-driven and story-like learning style, and through the observations of the arts. When a study was conducted by Christie and Harris, they found that in Aboriginal communities, learning took place from observation and trial and error. Harris first found that the Indigenous Australians best learned from observation modelling and limitation rather than talking and listening. Then, when he observed Indigenous students in a classroom environment, he found that the Indigenous students found it extremely hard listening to verbal instruction due to their familiar environment, observation, and storytelling. Now answer this. Would you be able to learn anything if you were taught maths in a different language, or if you didn't understand a task and the teacher expected answers without providing any examples to relate back to? It would be hard, because it's not how you learn. This is how the Indigenous students feel coming into an environment where they're all learning the same thing with the same capabilities. To resolve this problem, I have identified the pedagogies of observation and narrative stories to incorporate into lessons in order to ensure diverse learners feel comfortable and valued. The first approach, I would incorporate the use of more examples on the board, so the students are able to compare and observe the task. I would also like to take the time through the day to take the students outside and familiarize themselves with learning through different observation techniques. This involves giving the students the task to write or draw what they hear, see, or smell in their surroundings. This technique improves some students' observation skills and gives freedom to the students that best learn in this way to express themselves. When looking back at the study and the Dreamtime stories, it was evident that the Indigenous children were best learning from narrative-like stories and observations from their environment. Therefore, this leads us to the conclusion that the curriculum needs to fit in Indigenous pedagogies and frameworks to allow all students to reach their full potential. This simple painting portrays an important message about the spiritual connection between the land and the Aboriginal peoples. The sign first draws your attention with the words, "The land is our life." These words play a powerful role in representing how important the land is to the Indigenous Australians. When looking closer at the words, they are coloured in red and black for the purpose of the connection link between the land and the people. The words "our land is" in black and symbolises how the land is what makes up who they are. It's their building block for their identity. And the words "our life is" in red symbolises how their life is their land and how they care for it. The land is important to the Aboriginal peoples. According to the Palaku woman Amberline Kalamalina, for Aboriginal peoples, country is more than a place. Country is loved, needed, and cared for. And country loves, needs, and cares for her peoples in turn, as this is the law. Country is family, culture, and identity. Country is self. This is what Vincent Lingari was fighting for when he was fighting for his peoples. Family, culture, and identity, and ultimately themselves. At first glance, the painting may seem like there are only two men shaking hands, but when you delve deeper into the inspiration behind the painting, it's a pivotal moment in Aboriginal rights history. However, this moment is known as the most famous victory in Aboriginal land rights, when Gough Whitlam poured sand into Vincent Lingari's hand to symbolise him giving the land back. This symbolised gesture meant that the Aboriginal people weren't just winning their land back, but also having the freedom to express themselves again.